BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Wednesday, another Ripper Wednesday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Wednesdays, I talk to you guys about Jack the Ripper, perhaps the world's most famous unsolved mystery. And in this episode, I will be revisiting Charles Lechmere as a Jack the Ripper suspect and doing a preview of the new book, Jack the Ripper Double Cross. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about Jack the Ripper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Blackbox Ned. And in addition to Ripper Wednesday, there are other shows about true crime here on Black Box Online Radio. On Fridays, I talk about D.B. Cooper. On Tuesdays, about the story of JonBenet Ramsey. On Thursdays, about the Black Dahlia. And of course, on Mondays, about the Zodiac Killer. So I'd like to let you know that today's episode is partially sponsored by Michael Cole, a friend of the show and author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy. If this case fascinates you, feel free to check out the Zodiac Revisited. It's a deep dive into the mystery, and you can get it anywhere you get your true crime books, including Amazon.com and Spotify. And if you enjoy the series, please consider helping out Michael by leaving a 5-star review. But to get to today's episode, Ripper Wednesday is something that I do with 3 main objectives. The first is to talk about the evidence in the Jack the Ripper case. The second is to explore Ripper content that comes out. And the third is following the news. And in this episode, I am able to do all of that. And I have to give credit to Richard Jones of Jack the Ripper Tour, specifically the YouTube channel, because he has put out a series of new videos that I'll be going through here in this episode. One of them was on the state of Ripperology. One of them was on what happened to the victims' clothing in 1888, the victims of Jack the Ripper, that is. And the third was an interview that he did with Ian Hope, who is the author of the new book, Jack the Ripper Double Cross, which is going to explore the reasons why Charles Lechmere was not Jack the Ripper. But first, I have an unrelated challenge question for you. Some podcasts start out with a challenge question to the audience. You can give your response in the section down below. And that is, have you ever found a serial killer that you liked? And I don't mean that you're curious about the story, but have you ever found a serial killer that you have taken a liking to? Because I heard this discussed on an episode, actually from the Forbes Breaking News channel. It was an interview with Dr. Carol Lieberman, and she was talking about how some people like certain serial killers. And Jack the Ripper, of course, is perhaps the world's most famous unidentified serial killer. But have you ever found a serial killer that you liked? And please give your response in the comments section down below. And stick around to the end, where I will give my response to this challenge question. Charles Lechmere is one of the most famous Jack the Ripper suspects, and he's one of the most widely discussed suspects that has come into the world of Ripperology in the last 20 years. For more than 100 years, he was known simply as Charles Cross, but then it was discovered that Cross was an alias, and his name was actually Charles Lechmere. Now, to students of Ripperology and people who follow the Ripper case closely, he doesn't need much of an introduction. But if we are going to provide one, we're going to go back to August 31st of 1888 with the murder of Polly Nichols. Charles Lechmere left for work, and he was working as a cartman, pushing, well, something. Could have been carts of meat, could have been something else. And he's walking to work, and he sees something in the street. And then ultimately he realizes that it's a woman's body. And then he decides to wave down another passerby named Robert Paul. And he wants Robert Paul to examine the body with him, and then they determine that it is a woman who is either drunk or dead in the street. That's what they thought, and ultimately this was the body of Polly Nichols, the first victim of Jack the Ripper. Now, one thing that is very critical and crucial to this discussion is the time frame, because Charles Lechmere apparently says that he left work earlier than Robert Paul would have. Robert Paul would have been running late for work. And, I mean, these numbers are all approximate, where it's like if they met up at 3:40 a.m., Charles Lechmere would have left his home at 3:15 to 3:20 a.m., but it only took 10 minutes to walk to Bucks Row to the exact location. So if he walks there from 3:15 to 3:20, if he leaves in that time frame, then he's going to get there at 3:25 to 3:30 a.m., and then there would be a full 10 minutes before 3:40 a.m. when Robert Paul would have arrived. Bear in mind that all of these times are approximate, and the biggest estimations that I've heard have been 15 minutes, that he should have been there 15 minutes earlier. The smallest estimate that I've heard is that he would have been there 8 minutes earlier, when the murder of Polly Nichols could have taken place. But Ian Hope has written a new book called Jack the Ripper Double Cross, which he presented on the Jack the Ripper Tour YouTube channel, and he wanted to share something about this book by stating that it's not an anti-Lechmere book. If anything, it's a pro-Lechmere book and an anti-theory. He has created a book-length response to challenge a widely held belief and theory that Charles Lechmere was Jack the Ripper. But this incident here on August 31st of 1888 starts off by putting Lechmere in a very compromising position. Now, I'm going to try and be as unbiased as I can, to just go down the middle, to truly evaluate the information for what it is. And if you disagree with me, let me know down below. If you agree with me, let me know down below. Share anything you want in the comments section. Alright, so Robert Paul would have been behind Charles Lechmere walking, and according to Ian Hope and his analysis, then by the time that Charles Lechmere should have been able to hear Robert Paul walking, he would have been approximately 40 yards away. So for Lechmere to have been Jack the Ripper, he would have to meet up with Polly Nichols, stab Polly Nichols, mutilate her, and then 40 yards away he hears footsteps. So then he has to just jump into character, and he has to put on this ruse where he's pretending to be a witness. But Ian Hope points out that, firstly, there is a very substantial amount of distance between them at 40 yards, and would he even be able to hear him at that point? And I think that it's possible, maybe not the first thing someone would think about. If somebody is 40, 50 yards away, could you hear them walking? Perhaps. I mean, I don't think that that is anything that should be dismissed. The next one is so much more important, and that is that when Charles Lechmere, if he hypothetically were Jack the Ripper, would have had to have committed the murder, then put on his gloves, overcoat, and apron, and then he hears Robert Paul coming, so he would have had to have thrown together his whole plan to act as a witness and just act as a passerby and put on this ruse. He would have had to think of everything in approximately 12 seconds. Is that enough time to do that? I say absolutely yes. I could do that in 6 seconds. Just snap into character. Oh my, what is that? Here, come on. I think that could be something. Let's have a look. You could do that very easily. 12 seconds would be enough to snap into character. Because one thing that I've really noticed about a lot of people in the true crime world, and it goes even beyond Jack the Ripper, there are people in all of these cases that I follow who really underestimate how easy it is for people to lie, especially if they had sociopathic tendencies. Because the entire theory with Charles Lechmere is that he would have been a calculating sociopath. Now, this is all alleged, mind you. Charles Lechmere was never convicted, and I think that's one of the reasons why Ian Hope wanted to write this book, because he wanted to look at how, alright, this guy's been accused of these crimes, but never convicted. But that's just it. In the theory, hypothetically, he would have been a calculating sociopath who was completely aware of his mental faculties while he was doing this, and that's how he got away with it. By snapping into witness mode, by pretending. And when people are playing a part, they can do this very convincingly, especially if they have sociopathic tendencies. But it goes so far beyond that. Some people, especially children and teenagers, are very good at lying, and they can just get into these very convincing presentations. Some people are good actors. Some people are good sociopathic liars. And I'll just leave that segment there. But of course, Charles Lechmere was considerably older. He would have been 40 years old during the Autumn of Terror. But what do you really think about this? Do you think that he could have put on this ruse in approximately 12 seconds? Now, the second point is, Is there anything suspicious about him using the alias? Ian Hope has really tried to bring the hammer down on this one. Charles Lechmere was known as Charles Cross for years. In many of the Jack the Ripper books that I have read, he's referred to simply as Charles Cross. That was his stepfather's name, but his name was Charles Allen Lechmere, and this was something that was discovered and heavily publicized during the new millennium. But in regards to using the alias, Ian Hope said something during his Jack the Ripper tour interview, and that was that I don't even care if he called himself Mickey Mouse. That means nothing to me, because he spoke to P.C. Jonas Misen on the street. Number one, he would have interacted with a member of law enforcement who could have recognized him. Number two, he also had given his his place of employment, so they knew what he looked like and they knew where he worked, they knew where he was going, and if anything, he could have been easily identified. Now, even if he had given the name Mickey Mouse, that wouldn't be something suspicious. I think that'd be very suspicious. Mickey Mouse wasn't drawn until the 1920s. That'd be like 30 or 40 years earlier. Must be one of those time after time time traveling machines or something like that. But I digress from that. And the whole point is, yes, I completely see that. I don't think there's anything suspicious about the alias, if I can be very clear. And as you see, I mean, I'm really trying to just lay out the information exactly as I see it, point by point. It's a strong point that, I mean, in terms of Lechmere being Jack the Ripper, there is a reasonable point for Lechmere being Jack the Ripper in regards to the fact that he could have put together that ruse in 12 seconds. He could have heard Robert Paul walking from 40 yards away. He could have been aware that a witness was coming, so he pretended. I don't see anything wrong with that timeline and anything wrong with the amount of time that he needed to put on the ruse. I do see something wrong about saying that it's suspicious that he used an alias. Now, moving on to the next point here, and this relates to how Lechmere would have committed the crime without getting blood on him. I have to give a shout out to Jay, who's been a very loud voice in the comments section, who has simply said that all these people are saying that Lechmere would have had blood on his clothes and apron because of his job pushing carts of meat. But if he were going to work as opposed to coming home from work, then he wouldn't have started the shift yet. So any blood that he would have had on his clothes would have been dried blood, not fresh blood. I completely accept that. I mean, I think that that's not even open for disputing. I mean, any blood that would have been visible should have been dried. Now, if he had committed the murder of Polly Nichols, hypothetically, the way proponents of this theory involving Lechmere lay it out is that he would have removed his overcoat, apron, and gloves and committed the murder, then put them on to conceal the blood evidence. And that was something that I did not hear discussed in Ian Hope's presentation on Jack the Ripper tour. But which one of these things makes the most sense to you? And also, Ian Hope brought up a particular detail, and that is that when they were pushing carts of meat for Lechmere's company, they would have wrapped the meat first and then put it into wicker baskets. So the whole idea of getting blood drops all over his clothes would have been somewhat implausible. And that, again, would be something that is very, very bizarre if he actually were to have a bunch of blood all over his clothes. Anyway, I think the thing about concealing it with the apron and the overcoat is a little bit more convincing. Now, Ian Hope brought up another point, and that is that when Charles Lechmere appeared at the inquest, he wore his work clothes, and he simply wore old shabby work clothes, and he just wanted to really, really highlight this one and say, what does that have to do with anything? Why are people mentioning this? I mean, how on earth does that mean that somebody is guilty? I agree completely. Even if someone thinks that that is an abnormal thing to do, which I personally don't. I mean, lots of people go to court in all types of clothing. Like, if you watch court TV, even the 21st century, you'll be surprised about some of the outfits that people wear to court during serious situations. But this is in 1888 in London when, you know, it very simply is just a very, well, it's a very wild time, let's just say that. I don't think there's anything suspicious about showing up to an inquest or talking to the police or appearing in front of anybody in work clothes as opposed to something more formal. So these are some of the main points, and I think that that goes into the category of either Lechmere is not not Jack the Ripper or neutral. I don't think that there's anything incriminating about this. But Richard Jones asked him a very good question, and that is, why has this particular theory involving Charles Lechmere taken so much heat? Why has it become so popular? Why are people analyzing this particular theory so much? And Ian Hope has written a book about it, Jack the Ripper Double Cross. So he's had the time to think about this, and he put the words together better than I could. I was thinking the idea, but he said it better. As I said, he's written the book about it, and that is that there are strong personalities behind the Lechmere theory. Absolutely. Absolutely. But there is also really some credit that we need to give to the proponents of this theory, particularly Edward Stowe and Christer Holmgren. Christer Holmgren is the author of the book Cutting Point, and Edward Stowe is the host of the House of Lechmere channel. And I agree. They are very passionate, they are very adamant. Sometimes they are just very, very strict and very harsh against other people's Jack the Ripper theories. But I will add an additional point. I think that one of the reasons why this theory involving Charles Lechmere became so popular is because they actually provide explanations on how he committed the crimes. Not just, oh, well, this is somebody who lived in England. Maybe he could have been a serial killer for these reasons. This is what his personality was like. This is what he did for a living. This is, what his hobby was. Maybe somebody like Walter Sickert. He liked to paint. He made a painting called Jack the Ripper's Bedroom. Not stuff like that. They're actually showing you this is a scenario in which could have feasibly taken place where Charles Lechmere could have committed the crime. This is a time gap that shows that he had an ample opportunity to commit the murder of Polly Nichols, and the same being said for the other crimes in the Whitechapel murders, particularly the ones during the Autumn of Terror. But I would also add one challenge. On Jack the Ripper Tour, they brought up multiple points from people who were saying that Charles Lechmere is the only suspect who has a connection to a crime scene. And I think that this is just clearly false. This is untrue. For starters, Robert Paul is an alternative Jack the Ripper suspect, the second witness at Bucks Row, whom I was just saying that Lechmere would have had to have waved down, the guy that was walking toward Lechmere. He is an alternative suspect, and in that theory, he would have had to have committed the murder and then walked around in a circle or a square, right angles, and so on, and come back and pretended to have been a witness. So that's one, but we also have Louis Deemshoes, Isaac Kosabrowski, Samuel Friedman, who are all at Burner Street, and I have standalone episodes about all of them here on Black Box Online Radio. I invite you guys to check out some of my other content. How about George Hutchinson, who was, by his own admission, placing himself at Miller's Court on the night of Mary Kelly's murder? So there are, let's see, that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 suspects who have connections to the crime scenes and can be placed at the crime scenes on or around the times that the murders took place. And those are just the ones off the top of my head. If you can think of another one, please put it in the comments section down below. Can you name a Jack the Ripper suspect that can be placed at the crime scene? But overall, I still think that Lechmere is a reasonable suspect. And even after hearing these presentations, I am not completely convinced that he was not Jack the Ripper. I don't think that he was too old. I think he had the opportunity. But that's where I stand. I still place him as a strong Jack the Ripper suspect, and I didn't feel that the rebuttals were something that would completely eliminate him. Do they cast doubt? Absolutely. But I said very clearly during the first 2 points that I totally think that he could have heard Robert Paul, got into character mode, and then just put on a ruse. But I'll leave you with one final point, and that is that Ian Hope seemed to think that it didn't completely make sense that Charles Lechmere would commit the murder and then pretend to be the witness, and then he would want to come over to the body. And it's Robert Paul who says, let's lift her up, and Lechmere is the one who says no. And other people have brought this up here in the comments section on Ripper Wednesday when they have said, why on earth would Jack the Ripper do that? Why on earth would Jack the Ripper not want to have the body of the woman lifted, and then that would expose her wounds, that would maybe even have her head fall backwards? Wouldn't Jack the Ripper, in this theory, want to do something more horrific? If that's the whole theory, that Charles Lechmere is a calculating sociopathic serial killer, wouldn't he want Robert Paul to lift the body and just have a more horrific crime scene and more gruesome crime scene? And Ian Hope had a very good response for this, again, giving each piece of evidence what it's worth. And he said, if anything, if Lechmere were actually guilty, he should have been the one who said, yes, let's lift her up, because then maybe he would get blood on his body, and if he had any blood on his clothes, he could use that as an explanation and say, oh, well, I lifted her body up, that's why I have blood on my clothes. But he's the one who says that he didn't want to lift her up. Then, by Ian Hope's own admission, one of his finds was that there were contradictory news articles that came out on September 4th of 1888, where one article says that Robert Paul is the one who wanted to lift her body, and another one says that Charles Lechmere is the one who wanted to lift her body. So that creates a particular type of gray area all the same. But when I did my suspect tier ranking list, I put Charles Lechmere as a top-level suspect. I have suspicions. I understand how they could have arranged these explanations for him committing the crime, and how he could have had 10 minutes unaccounted for with Polly Nichols. That is not something that I'm going to easily dismiss. He's still a strong-ranking suspect in my opinion, but I am fully aware that it's all circumstantial, and when they say that he's the only suspect that could have done this, that, and the other, that is not true. There are other reasonable Jack the Ripper suspects out there. And some of the other strong-ranking suspects that I've talked about are Aaron Kosminski, Jacob Levy, Francis Thompson. Those are other ones that have come to mind. And I've even mentioned George Hutchinson as a strong-ranking suspect as well. Let me know what you think, and please put your ideas in the comments section down below. Now, for this episode, I told you that I was going to respond to multiple pieces of material from Jack the Ripper Tour, and one of them relates to the update in the world of Ripperology, when Richard Jones actually had Steve Blomer on the channel once again. Steve Blomer is the author of the book Inside Buck's Row, and he's working on an entire series of Jack the Ripper books. The next one will come out in 2026, and it will actually be on Mitre Square as opposed to Hanbury Street. But he's the author of Inside Buck's Row, and they're talking about how what really is new in the world of ripperological research? And the answer is AI. AI is becoming more and more prevalent when it comes to exploring true crime cases and unsolved mysteries, and looking at true crime content on YouTube. And for example, Richard Jones told a story of how somebody had used AI to recreate a scene in Victorian London, where they actually have people talking about the workhouses, and in the background of this AI-generated video, a 21st century Porsche drives by in the background. Like, there's just this Porsche driving through Victorian London, and he's like, why wouldn't somebody stop that during the editing phase? And my simple response to that is, not everybody evaluates the content. AI can generate content, and some people don't care. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes when I'm watching a video online, I can tell that it's AI generated because of the backgrounds and some of the images that are used, but you can still expect that a human was monitoring it because of the way that it's structured. And with a lot of this AI, people are calling it AI slop, where you're thinking that this person put something into AI, AI created the video, and they didn't examine it, they didn't edit it, they didn't verify any of the information, and they're just putting it out online. And true crime channels are going to have more and more of this as time goes by. And it's going to be a losing fight, because AI can generate videos faster than the human being. But what Richard Jones and Steve Blomer were talking about is that AI cannot fact check, it cannot verify the information. It's only pulling information from places on the internet. And what I've noticed with a lot of AI-generated scripts and AI-generated videos is they just take things, let's say maybe there's something Jack the Ripper related, and then they just assemble a script of things that have been pulled from the internet about Jack the Ripper. And you have no idea of knowing if it's factual or incorrect. It's just pulling anything with the name Jack the Ripper, and it assembles it, and it can create all types of errors. And the thing is, though, some people do not care. They are just putting this stuff out there for clicks, for views, and that's it. That's their only game. Whereas Some channels are using AI, but you can tell that they have a human monitoring the information, or at the very least, the information follows a specific sequence. And I've definitely noticed this more with the Zodiac Killer mystery rather than Jack the Ripper. Because, I mean, for me, it's just a little bit easier to spot some of the discrepancies or the errors. And once again, you can tune in every Monday for an episode about the Zodiac Killer. But we can add in another challenge question. Do you think that AI is a friend or foe to the true crime world? And the next thing that they were discussing in a different video is, what happened to Jack the Ripper's victims' clothing? The clothing that was worn by the victims of Jack the Ripper. Somebody asked a rather insightful question of, could the clothing worn by Jack the Ripper's victims be somewhere in an archive or a vault or in some type of box where people simply just were unaware of its location? And the only answer was, it's possible but improbable. There really aren't too many documentations of where the victims' clothing ended up. But my biggest takeaway from this was when they shared a particular detail about Jack the Ripper's final victim, Mary Kelly. And I'm citing Jack the Ripper tour. And they were talking about how Mary Kelly's clothing was not cut apart. Unlike the victims, Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, and Catherine Eddowes, they were stabbed by the Ripper, and they had numerous cuts and tears and rips in their clothing, whereas Polly Nichols did, whereas Mary Kelly did not. For the following reason, Mary Kelly's clothing was found folded on a chair in her room. And what does this suggest? To me, this strengthens the theory that the Ripper had conversed with the victims and that she had willingly gone into her room with the Ripper, and they were going to do something consensual. Yes, it was prostitution, but they were going to do something consensual, and then she disrobed, and that's when the Ripper attacked her. Because the alternative theory is that Mary Kelly had a window pane with broken glass that was filled with rags and newspapers, and that the Ripper would have removed that by putting his hand through, grabbing the lock on her window, opening the window, and then going in and attacking Mary Kelly. But was she just sleeping in the nude in November in England? It's possible. There was a substantial amount of wood that was on the fire, and the fire was very hot when would they believe the Ripper was attacking her? Did Mary Kelly do that, and was she just asleep naked and got attacked by the Ripper? Or was she preparing to do something consensual, and then the Ripper did those atrocities to her? I definitely think that it's the latter. Well, I mean, I really should. I know I was all over the map there, so I think it's the scenario where Mary Kelly voluntarily entered the room with the Ripper, and she disrobed, and he said he was going to pay her money for something, and that's when he attacked her. I do not think that he went through the window and then attacked her while she was sleeping. I know I said the latter, but I was all over the map. I think that it's the scenario where she did this consensually. What do you guys think about that? And I do apologize for spreading a lot of incorrect information about that on Ripper Wednesday, which isn't even so much incorrect. What I said on a previous episode of Ripper Wednesday was that my thinking was contaminated by Pat Brown when I watched her psychological profile video, where she made a reasonably convincing case that Jack the Ripper did not converse with the victims prior to the murders, but she does not believe that Mary Kelly was responsible for she does not believe that Mary Kelly was a victim of Jack the Ripper, that Jack the Ripper was responsible for Mary Kelly's murder. And in her scenario, Jack the Ripper is just kind of like walking up to women in vulnerable places and stabbing them. And she made some strong points about that, but me personally, I do believe that Jack the Ripper murdered Mary Kelly, and in that scenario, I don't think that Jack the Ripper would have broken in through the window. I think that it's more reasonable to think that he entered through the door and he went out through the door and he stole her heart. Terrible things that happened. But another takeaway from this particular video was that they were talking about one theory, that could the organs that were taken from the victims have been removed before they arrived at the mortuary, where Jack the Ripper stole the uterus from Annie Chapman, the uterus and kidney from Catherine Eddowes, and the heart of Mary Kelly. Could these organs have been taken prior to them arriving at the mortuary, and I think that that is just horribly, horribly improbable. That goes into the category of you have to provide some stronger evidence or some stronger reasons to demonstrate how and why you think that that's what happened. And I will just leave it there. But Steve Blomer brought up a quotation from Trevor Marriott, and he is explored Jack the Ripper in the 21st Century Investigation, and he proposed that the organs were actually stolen in the mortuary, which is a little bit more convincing. It's more feasible for somebody to have stolen the organs after the victims had already been brought to the mortuary than someone cuts out their kidney, uterus, and heart for some other type of illegal purposes, unethical purposes. But at the same time, I still think that they were stolen by the Ripper. And ultimately, I would love to know what you guys think. I mean, you can use this as another challenge question. Who do you think stole the organs from Jack the Ripper's victims? Do you think they were stolen from somebody who was transporting the bodies, stolen from a mortuary by a mortuary attendant, or stolen by the Ripper himself at the crime scene? I'm going with the crime scene. And the next thing that I would like to discuss with you guys very briefly is just I have to give full credit to Richard Jones of Jack the Ripper Tour for putting out all the content that he does, his interviews and his explorations into the Whitechapel murders, and also gives us an opportunity to look at new ideas from people who are sharing books like Ian Hope, once again, who wrote the book Jack the Ripper Double Cross. And Richard Jones also has a book out there called The London of Jack the Ripper. And if I could go back in time, I would share something with you guys on a personal note, and that is that if I could start this over, start Ripper Wednesday over again and arrange the books about Jack the Ripper that I would read personally, I would start with that book, The London of Jack the Ripper by Richard Jones. The second book that I would go with would be Peter Foreman's Jack the Ripper, which is mostly about the timelines associated with the Ripper case. And the third book would actually be Jack the Ripper, an Encyclopedia by John J. Edelston. And the reason why is that is a book that criticizes a lot of other Ripperologists, but it's a book that was ultimately heavily criticized itself. So it gives you the opportunity to look for certain red flags in the world of Ripperology. Then perhaps, I guess, go with Jack the Ripper, The Facts by Paul Begg, and then I would get into the suspect books. I would not really start with the suspect books if I could do things in retrospect, and feel free to share your own experiences about reading Jack the Ripper books. And in addition to The London of Jack the Ripper, Richard Jones has also written a book called Jack the Ripper Casebook. The word casebook has been used in a lot of Jack the Ripper books and publications. For example, there's the one by Donald Rumbelow. Richard Whittigan Egan maybe has the most famous one, but there is one called Jack the Ripper, the Casebook by Richard Jones. And I have to give a shout out to the YouTube channel Palmyre Fevrier. And the host of that program did a book review of Jack the Ripper, the Casebook, where it's more or less an exploration and a walkthrough. And there's one that does look very expensive, and I feel mostly satisfied with the contents of her book review in terms of purchasing that one. And if you do want to watch her video one more time on the channel, Palmyre Fevrier, it's about 6 minutes long, but you're going to have to turn the volume up. I primarily watch YouTube on the television, and when I was watching her video, I had to turn the volume up to level 50 for the first time ever. Normally I watch TV with the volume at level 20. I mean, it's just a little bit hard to hear on my TV, but she gave an explanation about Jack the Ripper, the Casebook by Richard Jones, where it's more or less, okay, these are some illustrations, these are photographs, these are recreations of the Jack the Ripper letters, lots of information that would be very valuable to newcomers to the case. I don't think that seasoned Ripperologists would find it too enjoyable, but as I said, just from watching that video, I think you got the majority of the content that you would get from that book. But I absolutely love The London of Jack the Ripper, and the reason why I said to read The London of Jack the Ripper first was that's the book that's really going to provide explanations as to how and what the names of the things mean. Like when someone shouted the word Lipsky after the murder or around the murder of Liz Stride. Well, what does that mean? And it tells you the story of Israel Lipsky and all types of background info like that. The London of Jack the Ripper, which you might still be able to get it online for free, actually, from Jack the Ripper Tour. But the final thing that I have for you guys here on Ripper Wednesday is my response to the challenge question. Have you ever found a serial killer that you liked? And my answer is no. Have I found serial killers that I'm curious about and fascinated by? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. There's serial killers that I want to learn more about. But I don't like them. And I told you this came from a conversation with Dr. Carol Lieberman, who was being interviewed for Forbes. Forbes Breaking News, actually, was the name of the channel. And she was talking about Brian Kohberger, a 21st century murderer from the United States who also needs no introduction. And what she was saying is that he was a criminology student, and during his criminological education, he took a liking to Ted Bundy. And that's why I decided to ask you guys that question. Have you ever taken a liking to a serial killer? And as you see, Brian Kohberger went on to be a murderer. He murdered 4 people in Idaho in 2022. And even though we want to learn about these stories, I don't like serial killers. And this is something that I find somewhat almost even like an internal struggle for myself. I spend almost all day every day learning about murderers, but I don't like them. I don't enjoy learning about them. I view it as history, analysis, as learning about humanity, psychology. There are different sides of the academic disciplines that a lot of people are afraid to touch. So I do think they are worthy of an exploration. But that being said, I do think that there are limits. And this goes so far beyond liking a serial killer. Brian Kohberger was a student of Dr. Catherine Ramsland, who is a professor at DeSales University. She has authored 59 books, authored or co-authored, that is. I've discussed her book, How to Catch a Killer, here on BBOR recently for Zodiac Monday. And she was interviewed about her connections to Brian Kohberger and asked would she write a book about him, study him, interview him, or co-author a book with him. And she was like, oh, well, I'm not really sure. That's what she said in the interview that I heard from her. In this Forbes interview, indirectly from Dr. Carol Lieberman, she said that Dr. Catherine Ramsland was strongly considering writing a book with Brian Kohberger about the Idaho murders, and I think that that would be a very poor taste thing for her to do. I do not think that she should do that. And yes, I just said we want to study how people behave, but if you have a personal connection, this person was your former student who may have even had the fantasy of getting a book written about him by you, if I were in her position, I would just take a step back and say, oh yes, I'm an academic, but a different academic can explore this subject. And it doesn't mean she has to stay completely silent on the issues. She's actually been very public. She's done numerous interviews. I was just telling you that I watched one, but I do not think that she should feed this particular type of public desire purely for feeding her own personal desires. She's already authored 59 books. She wants to talk about Brian Kohberger, sure. But co-authoring a book with him, I think, would not be in anyone's best interest. If anything, that just rewards the murderer and goes on to say, all right, well, this person had a famous forensic psychologist who was his professor, and now she's writing a book with him. That would show people that they could use murder as a way to catapult themselves to fame. And I think that that's bad. And if you want to challenge me on that, put your ideas in the comment section down below. Has there ever been a serial killer that I've liked? No, absolutely not. And Brian Kohberger liked Ted Bundy, and he went on to commit murder. Liking serial killers is toxic, people. Let me know what you think about anything involving Jack the Ripper. What do you think about Charles Lechmere as a Jack the Ripper suspect? What do you think about any of the challenge questions that have been discussed? Do you think that AI is going to be helpful for Jack the Ripper? And also, you can also let me know the books that you would read originally. If you could go back in time to the start of your Ripperological journey, what information would you evaluate? Me, I started with the suspects, then I went to the articles, then the theories, then the books, and a whole lot of YouTube videos. in between. Let me know what you think about anything that has been discussed in this episode, and this show comes to you Monday through Friday here on YouTube. You can get this program also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts under the names Black Box True Crime or Black Box Podcasts. Monday about the Zodiac Killer, Tuesday about the story of JonBenet Ramsey, Wednesday about Jack the Ripper, Thursday about the Black Dahlia, and Friday about D.B. Cooper. And I also release shorts and reels Monday through Friday here on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com. buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. That's all for me now. See you tomorrow for a new episode about the Black Dahlia. Until next time.